Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we're going to be looking at ways to minimize hair frizziness in Photoshop. This is something that I've struggled with a lot over the years, and I'm sure a lot of you probably have as well. And it's something that I've really found out about retouching hair is that you never really want to do too much to it, but it is such a prominent feature and it actually requires a lot of attention and detail quite a lot of the time when you are retouching. So it's really about maintaining that delicate balance between making it look natural and still keeping it in check and keeping it looking neat and refined. So unfortunately, hair is actually one of those things too, which is just so easy to become unruly. No matter how good your hairstylist is, there's always going to be a couple of hairs out of place, and there's going to be instances of frizziness like we have in this particular photo, and where it might come off looking a little bit flat from certain angles. It's a very difficult part of retouching that I've come to learn over the years. It is best to make sure that the hair looks as good as it possibly can on the day of the shoot, and make sure that it's as neat as possible. And if you do see any really big stray sections or any flat areas, it's good to try and fix it then and there if possible. Having said that, it is something that is quite common, and it is a common occurrence to have to retouch parts of the hair in images. So today I'm going to go through a couple of tips on how I would fix this kind of flat area over here that's looking a little bit flat, and also the frizziness, and just really maintaining it and refining it a little bit more to make it look natural still, but a little bit neater as well. We're going to zoom in on this photo here, and I'm going to show you guys a good overview of how frizzy certain areas do look. So it's really the angle that the photo has been taken at in this instance as well, why it actually looks that way and why it does look a little bit flat on that side. And also we do have a little bit of frizziness, which is very normal with hair, and especially when you're creating a big hairstyle and there's a lot of styling to be done, it is quite a common occurrence. So we are going to spend the first few minutes taking out some of the stray hairs. This is usually how I like to do it in a step-by-step fashion with retouching hair. So I'm going to create a new layer here that's blank, and I'm going to rename this Stray Hairs. Then I would go over to the spot healing brush tool on the side here, so the one at the top. And the way that I like to do this to be pretty precise as well is I like to make sure that when I'm using my tablet that the pen pressure option is selected just here under the brush options. So I like to do this because it will create more of a tapered effect. So you can see here, it's all down to your pen pressure, and you can really be detailed with where you're removing those stray hairs from. So now I would, keeping the brush size around 40 for this particular image, I would actually start just running the brush along those stray hairs. And you have to do this quite carefully because sometimes it does not sample well. And we're going to be really specific with how we take out some of these hairs. You don't want to go overboard. That's always my main bit of advice to anyone that's retouching and doing beauty retouching, is just try not to do too much. Sometimes it will take you a while to realize what is too much and what is not enough. But I'm just going to keep removing some of these stray hairs here to make it a little bit neater first on the forehead. And then we're going to move on to other sections of the hair where it's getting a little bit frizzy and a little bit more noticeable that they are stray hairs. So before I move on to the next step of removing some of these other stray hairs, I'm actually going to go to my skin retouching layers, which I already have here, and I'm going to go to my dodge and burn layers. So the first one here is the dodge layer, which I'm just going to rename so you guys can see. And this is the burn layer. Now, if you guys don't know what dodging and burning is, or you haven't tried it before, I have lots of different tutorials on dodging and burning that I'll link down in the description box if you'd like to check those out. But for now, dodging and burning is going to help me out with removing some of those shadows just on the hairline from those hairs that we've just removed, and we'll blend it in a little bit better into the skin tone. So I'm going to select my paintbrush tool. I'm going to make sure that the hardness for the brush is at 0% and the flow here is at 1%. I'm also going to make sure that transfer is selected here, and that'll make sure that we're just applying it really softly and making sure that white is also my selected color. I'm going to then paint in some of these shadows a bit more light, so you can see it just blends that bit better into the skin tone. And I know it's a little bit hard to see with my cursor. I'm so sorry about this. I am looking at downloading a different cursor pack so you guys can see when I'm actually dodging and burning a little bit better. But for now, I'll just show you guys a rough kind of idea of what I'm doing. I'm just moving over this area with the dodge tool to blend in those shadows a little bit more into the skin tone. And I'm also just going to move the stray hairs underneath the dodging and burning layers, because this will actually help with dodging and burning on top of this. I should have mentioned that before, but I usually do it in a slightly different fashion, but I'm just going to make sure that's all blending pretty well there. Alright, so as you guys can see, I've just used the dodge and burn tool to help blend that section in a little bit more. So I'm going to go back to the beginning for a second and show you guys what that's actually done and how we've removed those shadows and those stray hairs. So you can see that's made a really big difference there. So that's really tidied up that area a lot more. Now we're going to move on to the stray hairs again, and getting the spot healing brush tool, I'm going to then start carefully removing some of those overlapping stray hairs over this area so we can make the waves look really smooth without distractions. And as I said, it's important to not go too far here because this kind of sampling can only sort of take you so far. You can look at cloning. However, I do tend to find that the spot healing brush tool really does a pretty good job with removing stray hairs. And I mean, you can kind of be doing this all day long, but as I said, I like to be quite light-handed with this and make sure that I'm not going too over the top. So I'm only sticking to kind of like around the fringe line at the moment, just removing those strays that are a little bit distracting. I'm not going to remove any at the back just yet because I've got another step that I'll show you guys in just a second that I'm going to do. And you guys can see just by removing those stray hairs how much that sort of cleans up this area and really removes those distractions. Now I'm going to show you my next step, which would be to use the Liquify tool. So what we're actually going to do for that is we're going to click on the background layer, and I usually just duplicate the background layer. So I drag it into the new layer button, and then we've got a copy. I'm then going to zoom out a little bit, and now we're going to go up to Liquify. So we go to Filter and then Liquify. And now this is the fun part. This is where we get to reshape the hair a little bit, and this is how I would usually reshape hair if it's a little bit flat like this area is. You do have to be careful with this because it can start to look very unnatural if you go overboard with this tool, and it's not a tool that I use very often. So in this case, you can see there's a little bit more of a lift or a little bit of a kick in the hair here. So we're just going to move that in a little bit just to give it a little bit more shape. I'm also going to kind of move that out a little bit. And I'm also going to lift this up too. So we've got a little bit more shape, and bring that in a little bit more. You can see just how much it can make a difference in just a few little pushes. But that's why it's so important to make sure you don't go too far. And usually I would just kind of push it into a rough shape of how I think it looks best. And usually as well, what I will do is I'll make sure the brush is nice and big, and I'll sort of like kink up the areas that are already curled and that are already kind of like sticking out, just to kind of give it that little bit more lift. And it just kind of makes the curls even a little bit bigger and look a little bit bouncier too. So as I said, it is very important though to make sure that this area doesn't look too fake. Okay, so I would actually probably leave it like that, and I'm just going to press OK now. We do have a couple more things that we need to do and we need to fix, so I'm just going to show you guys what that's done. So removing that, you can see it's quite flat over this side, and it just kind of like squares out a little bit too much. Here we've kind of created a little bit more movement, but I've got a couple of other things that I am going to do. And if you have used the stray hair option too much in this area, as you can see, mine has just blown out a little bit and you can see them just in there. I would just remove those and then go over them later. This is why we always work in layers, because it's really easy to remove and change those sections later on. So if you're finding that there's any sort of sections where the hairs have been moved too far or they look a little bit funny, then you can go back and redo them or tidy them up a little bit later. So there's just a couple of sections there that I've just erased from the stray hairs, because obviously that is above this background copy layer. I'm going to take another snapshot and go back to the original, so you can see that we're kind of slowly starting to improve the shape of the hair. I'm then going to zoom in again, and now we're going to get rid of some of this frizziness around here. So I'm going to create another layer on top. This is going to be a blank layer, and this is going to be called background. And this is a neat little trick for studio images, because a lot of the time you will have a solid or roughly solid color in the background. So what I actually like to do in this instance, you can go to the stray hairs section again and use the spot healing brush to remove a lot of the strays, which is sometimes what I do. A slightly quicker way of doing it sometimes is to actually get the paintbrush tool, make it relatively soft, so maybe around 30%, and making the brush a little bit bigger, maybe about 100 pixels, keeping the flow at 1 and then holding down Alt on the keyboard. You would then select the color of the backdrop. So once I've got my color selected, I will then start to move the color softly and carefully over those areas, and you can keep selecting different colors as well. Over those frizzy areas. I wouldn't recommend going too far with this, as I say with everything. So just enough to kind of tidy up that area, because the more you do with the spot healing brush tool at times, the more it can start to look very fake, and that's really not what we want. There's lots of different ways and methods that you can retouch hair, and one of them is also by copy and pasting sections. I've actually got that in my beauty retouching course. I go over that a little bit more about how you can copy and paste sections to recreate parts of the hair. But this for now is probably just something that I would do for this particular image. I'm going to kind of do that the whole way down over these strands here as well. You don't have to do it to completely block the strands out. To make it look a bit more natural, you can go a bit softer. And you would just keep selecting areas, because it is a bit more of a gradient sometimes with backgrounds when you're photographing studio because of the lighting. And as you can see there, that's kind of, if I turn that on and off, you can see that's really removed the frizziness. We would just kind of try and blend those background colorings in a little bit more. Just run that over the background. And just a bit further down that way as well. So to give you a quick before and after, that is what that specific technique has done. So it's really cleaned it up a lot. If you're finding that it looks a little bit too crisp here, what I would generally do is create another layer and rename this New Hairs. And then I would get the paintbrush tool, and you guys probably know what's coming. I'm going to make it a lot harder, probably around 100%, and the brush a lot smaller. And then I would make sure the flow was a lot higher, probably at 80% and above. And I would start to select colors from the hair and making sure that the brush settings are on shape dynamics. Probably not transfer at this point, just shape dynamics and pen pressure. And then I would start, I'd make my brush a little bit smaller. And then I would start drawing fake hairs. I might just tick on transfer for this particular section because we don't want it to look too obvious. But you can do like little hairs to make it look a little bit more natural. It's up to you. Try always to sort of draw the hairs in the way that the hair is actually going. And you can literally be here all day doing this kind of work and retouching. So this is why I always say it's better to get hair right in person and make sure that you can kind of work with what you've got on the day. And you can just draw as many hairs as you want to kind of make it look as natural as possible. And just kind of like zooming out, you can see that that's kind of just softened the edges a little bit and made it not look so stark. You can change the brush size and like, you know, make it a little bit more messier. I'd always recommend going very light-handed with this though. And if you do make a mistake, you can just get a soft eraser and just erase those parts. I'm pretty happy with how that's looking at the moment. The only thing I would do as a finishing touch is just go back to the stray hairs section. I would get the spot healing brush and I would just go over those areas that we had to redo. And you're not going to get every single little hair looking perfect, unfortunately. That's just kind of how hair is. And you don't want to have to do that either with your retouching. And I'm just going to fix up those little hairs there. You can also paint over the hair if you're feeling like you want to smooth it out a little bit more. You can paint using the paintbrush tool and selecting colors of the hair. I don't always love that technique though, because sometimes it can over soften things and you start to lose texture a little bit. Okay, so zooming out now, you can see that we've finally sort of finished smoothing out this area and we've given it a little bit more shape. It's not so flat. So I'm actually going to go back to the original image now. So this is the original and now that is the after. I'm going to zoom in again and show you guys what that looks like. So this is the original and this is the after. Now I can't stress this enough to you guys. As I said before in this tutorial, if you're on a shoot and you have any sort of power to shift how the hair is going to look or how it currently looks, make sure you do that, because it's going to make it so much easier for you in retouching. You don't want to have to do too much work to hair. As I said before, it's more of just a tidy up, or it should be more of just a tidy up in Photoshop. But these are some tips that if you're struggling with frizziness, hopefully they might help. And if you've got a hairstyle that's just really not working in photos, maybe some of these tips can help you kind of tidy it up a little bit more and retouch those areas. But guys, I hope you really enjoyed this tutorial, and I hope you learned something new. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up, and if you haven't subscribed to my channel already, please click the subscribe button and the notification bell to make sure you see all the videos that I'll have coming in future. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!